Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name is James Russell. I'm head of the Leicester Media School here at De Montfort University, and I also teach on the Film Studies programme.
We are meeting today, Dr. James, just to find out the situation we are caused by this COVID-19. Our schools have been asked to go on a lockdown. So I just want to find out your experience in this scenario with relationship to your deliverance of lectures yourself, as well as maybe the students.
Yeah, sure. So I think, like a lot of people, lockdown took us slightly by surprise at the end of the last academic year, and it was a real rush to move to online delivery. It affected the last couple of weeks of the 1920 term. What was surprising from the start, I guess from a sort of teaching perspective, was how many of the tools we had already in place. So we already had Blackboard Collaborate, we already had Microsoft Teams. We hadn't really been using those for online teaching. We haven't been using them for online meetings either, but we were able to switch quite quickly over to online delivery methods. In some ways, the most surprising thing is how much it works relatively well. So I tend to teach sort of the studies side of film studies. So I tend to teach a sort of film business stuff to students, as well as a few other things. And that's largely speaking kind of humanities style teaching, lectures, workshops, seminars. What was interesting is we were able to duplicate that. You're able to record lectures and share those online. We are able to have online seminars using these sort of group meeting facilities like Teams and like Collaborate. And they work fairly well. So students are able to engage. There is, I mean, the biggest challenge I think students on those sort of courses faces is just having the right technology. So yeah, you can use your phone, but a computer is better. You do need a relatively up-to-date laptop or computer. We do have a digital hardship fund where students could get sent out a laptop or get sent out a kind of Wi-Fi dongle. Wi-Fi access was the other big challenge. And a lot of students took advantage of that, but I think there are always some who slip through the net and find it difficult. But the vast majority of students had kind of access to the internet. And so we were able to carry on teaching. And I've taught that way off and on throughout the last term. So the last term I started with sort of a mix of face-to-face and online teaching. And when lockdown 2 happened, it became, you know, almost entirely online teaching, or it did become entirely online teaching. We can still have discussions. You know, we can still share information. So for me and for the sort of course I teach, it was okay. I think for all of us, what we miss is a sense that teaching is a kind of physical thing. So teaching and learning is a physical thing as well. That what you miss in a classroom environment, those discussions, that conversation. I'm someone who relies a lot on conversation and discussion in class, and I tend to approach classes by asking questions and then having a kind of discussion with students, and you hope that out of that discussion we learn something. That's the hardest thing to reproduce. You can reproduce it to a certain extent, but we're not in the same room. We're not in the same place. It is harder to engage with your teaching, both, you know, as a staff member and as a student. It is something that might feel more distant. So leaving aside the technical problems that some people face, which are big and real, there's also the teaching, and you can learn, but you perhaps may not learn as effectively. It isn't as much a part of your life. I'm someone who really believes that being physically present is an important part of teaching and learning. And I think looking more widely across the school, those areas which relied on you know, strong technical, practical elements as part of their teaching. We're a university that is quite heavily technical and practical. If you look at something like graphic design or game design, or to some extent journalism, the course you're on, they're harder. It's harder to reproduce a lot of the sort of physical skills or the technical skills or the technological skills you have. So we have you know, licenses for students who can then access software like Adobe, which is a really important part of all sorts of courses in the media school. But we also have virtual labs, which allow you to sort of go online and virtualize a university machine. So you can do your kind of drawing, digital drawing or editing online, but it's not the same. I think we recognize that it is harder. So it's harder on those courses. It's fractionally easier on the sort of course that I teach, but it's harder again. You can still learn, but that lack of physical presence is a bigger challenge to overcome.
Taking into account that people come from different environments, especially say your students, and they have got different backgrounds, and the support they might get while at home is maybe totally different from when they can access the facilities at a campus. So how do you account for that, especially to make sure that your students are going to be more or less in the same place?
Yeah, I mean, that's tougher. So part of it is that those sort of digital hardship funds, so that students are able to access either Wi-Fi dongles or laptops, or, you know, we've sent out to some students, our music students, what we call virtual or lab in a box we've sent out, or studio in a box, where they've been able to get some technical kit sent to their home to allow them to complete assignments. In a lot of cases, we have tried to make sure that the teaching we deliver still reaches the learning objectives. So we have, you know, that's our main job, is to try and make sure that we tweak the teaching, and we tweak especially how we assess students, to ensure that they do still learn the same things. Ultimately, university is about learning certain ideas, skills, so that we can continue to help students with. But it does sometimes change. So one of the things we've done is we've tweaked and changed assessments at times to make them slightly more theoretical, to mean that delivering an artifact, we would call it, isn't necessarily the only thing that they do, or the summative thing that they do on that course. It's also delivering their knowledge and understanding, and we test that in different ways. I think students also have easy access to extensions. There is additional time for examinations. In fact, there are very few examinations now, especially on the courses that I oversee in the kind of media school. And students do have what we call a kind of safety net process at the moment. So your marks are sort of safeguarded to make sure you don't lose out. And it's that tweaking of assessment that has been the kind of key thing, to try and open up the ability to complete your course to everyone, right, regardless of your sort of background. It isn't an easy thing. As I said, in many ways, I find the teaching, to a greater or lesser degree, kind of works online, but it isn't quite the same. And that extends to assessment and completing projects as well. It works, you can do it, and students do it, all of our students do it, but it isn't quite the same as the experience that they had originally planned, especially if you're second and third year. So there we are.
And say, how do you compare the traditional way of delivering lectures and the one which has been brought in just because of this pandemic? I know we've learned quite some techniques, or we've seen some advantages. Can you also add on to what we've used, which we can say, if the situation comes better, we can still say we are going to continue using these methods we have acquired?
Well, I mean, I think I keep saying that I think the situation has been surprisingly, it has worked surprisingly well, right? The technologies that we have. So I remember some years ago giving a lecture, and it was a lecture relatively early in the morning, sort of 9 a.m. lecture. And I was stood at the front, and I like to think my lectures are thrilling and interesting and exciting. And lots of students were paying attention, but quite a few students obviously weren't, you know, were sort of drifting, were distracted in one way or another. And I remember at that point thinking, is this the best way that we can deliver teaching? Me standing at the front and students sort of sitting and listening. Can we record it? Could we do something different? And that motivates a lot of discussion about flipped classroom in kind of pedagogy as well. It's obviously, you know, we all have similar thoughts. What's happened under COVID is we've basically tested that. So we've basically reached a point where we have recorded all of our lectures, and we sort of deliver them online, and students can access them. What I worry about is, do you learn that way? So this, you know, and especially when that comes to classroom. So in a sort of classroom discussion, you can do exactly the same, but it is a bit more one way than it was previously. It's harder to have a discussion. We're not in the same physical presence, physical space with one another. And I suppose that on the one hand, we've learned that all of this is possible. So it is possible to use this technology to teach quite effectively. And on the other hand, I think the challenge we face is, I think learning is a physical thing. Learning is something you do around other people, that you learn as a group. You learn by being somewhere and hearing something or doing something. And I think that is the harder thing to recreate, that we can do what we're doing, but it works very well, but it isn't quite the same as a sort of learning experience. At least that's how it feels to me. I don't know if that's how it feels as a student. Maybe it feels great as a student, I'm not sure. So I think we've used all of these tools, and I find that, so we use a mix of Microsoft Teams, Blackboard Collaborate for sort of workshops. We can do breakout rooms and small group discussions and all sorts of other things. Hopefully that works relatively well. But I think it isn't the same. And in terms of what we've learned or what we might do looking ahead, I mean, I think universities have learned, yes, that online teaching can work very effectively, because we had all these tools and we weren't using them necessarily previously. I think we've also learned that there are opportunities to deliver much more sort of distance learning courses, right? That students can learn this way. And I think if you sign up knowing what you're signing up for as a sort of primarily online course, I think it's a hugely effective mechanism for teaching if you want to do that. I think what I would like to see is more teaching that incorporates online as a sort of method of delivery, but doesn't necessarily replace face-to-face. So we make more use of online tools in all sorts of ways. And I suppose in the other side of my job as a kind of head of school, one of the things we've discovered is that, well, I already knew that we attended a lot of meetings, and that's a big part of what I do in terms of admin and leadership. But those meetings can take place online. So a lot of that discussion can take place online, and we don't necessarily have to be in the same place. The same is true with kind of international developments. You don't need to visit an international partner in order to be able to set something up. You can do it virtually and save a lot of time and money. So those are advantages and things I'd like to keep.
I know the government has introduced a vaccine so as to reduce the pandemic situation we have faced. But however, of late, I understand that Leicester is going up, unlike other cities. So what will be our situation as we foresee or to experience what we have missed for quite a long time?
Well, I think one hopes that Leicester continues to go in the same direction as other places in the UK, and it is patchy. We're certainly planning to return to face-to-face teaching next term. That some elements will be online, but the vast majority of teaching will hopefully return to a sort of more normal face-to-face format. And we have a number of options depending on whether social distancing measures are still in place. And we just don't know if they will be or not. Once you come to talking about what's going to happen, universities are sort of at the mercy of kind of COVID and government policy in the same way as any sort of institution in the UK. We think we know what might happen, but we can't guarantee anything at all, which is a real shame. But what I hope is that we now move into this phase where everything opens up at the same pace. I mean, we're talking on the day where shops open and barbers and hairdressers and gyms reopen and pubs can suddenly open outside. So and we also get the announcement that the vaccine's going down to the under 50s now. So we're talking on a day which still feels that we're moving in a kind of positive direction. We just have to hope that that's maintained, because I think as a society, this is the only direction we can go in now, really. And universities are very much at the mercy of that.
Yeah, I do really thank you, Dr. James, for all your contribution in this discussion. If ever there's anything we have left out, I do really welcome you to just make further contributions if need be.
No, I'm done. Thanks, Pythias.